Japan, similar to its East Asian neighbors, is facing a growing shortage of school teachers. Fewer are applying for the job, while record numbers are taking time off or just simply quitting for mental health reasons. CNA's Michiyo Ishida finds out what's pushing teachers to the breaking point.
Classes have long ended at this public elementary school in Tokyo. But it's not unusual for the teachers to be working past 8 in the evening. Chiharu Kurayama is a homeroom teacher here at Shimoda Elementary School.
もともとは子供が好きで、幼稚園の先生か小学校の先生にいつかはなりたいなぐらいの気持ちで大学には入ったんですけど。
Her devotion to the children has kept her going for 18 years, despite the hours, workload, and high levels of stress that teachers in Japan face. Ms. Kurayama's day begins at 8 a.m. She teaches her first grade students almost all subjects with barely any breaks. Lunchtime is spent serving the children their meals. Lessons end at about 2 p.m. and then the children do their chores. On some days, Ms. Kurayama has to oversee school activities. If not, that's when she begins a mountain of miscellaneous tasks, from helping 6th grade teachers make graduation certificates to handling calls from unhappy parents. Her duties outside of the actual teaching pile up quickly.
教育だけに専念できる環境が整うと、授業の質も上がるし、先生たちももっと笑顔になるんじゃないかなと思います。いろんなプラスアルファの仕事がすごくたくさんあるので。
School teachers told me working overtime or more than 14 hours a day was not unusual for many years, but it hasn't been addressed as infringing on work-life balance. It's for one due to their commitment to their jobs and also the high expectation the local community holds towards school teachers. A poll by Japan Teachers Union last year shows teachers in public schools put in an average of 96 hours of overtime a month, putting them at high risk of karoshi, or death from overwork. Regulations state that teachers cannot be forced to work overtime, but many feel pressured to do so.
耳が聞こえなくなったことがありましたね、一時期。片方だけ、もう本格的に聞こえなくなって病院かかって、一生懸命治療したのは1ヶ月半ぐらいですね。一緒に働いてる人たちが結構精神的にきつくなっていっちゃってお休みをされることが増えちゃって、その話を聞いたりとか、あとはその人たちのフォローをしたりとかするのでちょっとストレスがすごい溜まってたので。
Latest figures from Japan's Education Ministry show a record 12,192 public school teachers took leave due to mental illness in 2022, while another 953 resigned for the same reason in the 2021 academic year. The issue is causing a serious shortage of teachers. 64% of public elementary school teachers surveyed by a nonprofit education group say they are short-staffed. Former educator Kumi Sugaya, who quit in March, says she burnt out after a 4-year teaching career.
1ヶ月ぐらいちょっと体調悪かったんです。でもそれでもやっぱり担任って1人しかいないじゃないですか。だから行かなきゃいけなくて、それは結構メンタル的にもきつかったですね。休めない、やっぱ代わりがいないので。
Teachers in Japan face immense pressure to perform. Former educator George Miyazaki, who resigned last year, says he faced criticism from his own colleagues.
子どもたちの授業を授業見られて、あれがダメだこれがダメだ、授業を準備しなさい、授業を準備したものを見せなさいで、 実際にやってみる。でもダメだしでこう日々改善されない状態が続いて、ちょっとこれ辛いなと思って。
More than half of some 10,000 educators surveyed by Japanese think tank in 2022 say they would not recommend teaching as a career. To woo and retain teachers, some schools are cutting working hours, while authorities are looking at upping overtime allowances as well as other reforms. But for now, many youth are shunning the profession. There were only 1.1 applicants for each vacancy in Tokyo's public elementary schools this year, the lowest ever.
So just how profound is the problem of teacher burnout in East Asia? Well, let's hear it from our CNA correspondents, Deborah Wong in Shenzhen and Michiyo Ishida in Tokyo. Debs, we heard there from Michiyo's report just that Japanese teachers are at a breaking point, and I don't blame them. 96 hours of overtime a month, 14-hour day shifts, that is quite a stretch. But to help us understand, what is it like for teachers in China? Is it any better or worse?
Well, I would say, Otelli, the situation is quite comparable to what Japan is experiencing. You know, there was a survey done by state media and the National Institute of Education last November, and it found that a third of respondents report working more than 55 hours a week, and that is 11 hours more than the stipulated maximum work time of 44 hours a week under China's labor law. And in that same survey, 92% of respondents say they have overtime, they work overtime every day. So there is increasing pressure also because China recently reformed its national curriculum in recent years to make subjects harder, and there is pressure to perform. And so what that means is outside of lesson time, you know, teachers are also expected to conduct after school lessons, and on top of that they also need to plan sports and arts activities, and they've also had to do a lot of administrative tasks. I think that's something similar that Michiyo reported about in her story earlier, and these are administrative tasks for official government inspection. So what teachers have to do is that they have to keep a record of everything. They have to present an analysis of their own lessons, their own colleagues' lessons as well. Also what they are doing right to help their students succeed in exams. And, you know, teachers have taken to social media platforms like Weibo or even Xiaohongshu to complain about their workload, saying that they don't even have time to teach or to prepare for lessons. You know, the very essence of what being a teacher means is in some way diluted in that sense. So quite similar to Japan.
Yeah, I mean, and all these administrative tasks, I mean, it all eats into your overtime, right? And I can see how all of that adds up. And actually, as a matter of fact, I mean, we've heard Japan is similar to China, and even in South Korea as well. Apparently, this time last year, tens of thousands of teachers across South Korea, they were protesting about student misbehavior, harassment even by the parents. So, Michiyo, then, I mean, we all know that, you know, Japan and countries across East Asia has a very high and competitive education environment. So is it true then that also teachers are often held accountable for their students' performance and hence all that extra pressure?
Well, let me explain to you the Japanese education system. You know, if a child goes to a public school, then it will have to be in the neighborhood of residence. Academic performance in the elementary school years doesn't really matter. Anyone can finish 9 years of education. It's compulsory and free. And no matter how bad your grades are, you don't flunk. But for those who want to advance to senior high school and to good senior high school, which is not compulsory, then your grades in junior high school matter. And as to whether teachers will be held accountable, well, based on my observation, it depends on the school principal. If the school principal wants to boost the standing of the school, he might pressure his staff and the teachers. So it's really up to the leadership of the school principal.
Right. Deborah, is it sort of similar in China or across Hong Kong as well? I mean, we know, that it has also a very high standard in order to do well in the exam. So how does the intense academic pressure, the high expectations in these schools impact the teachers' mental health?
Well, I think the first word that comes to everyone's mind when you think about academic stress in China is the very dreaded gaokao, or college entrance exams. It's traditionally seen as a high-stakes exam because that could very well shape someone's future. China did ban private tuition in July 2021 for students below the age of 16, and there has not been any new licenses given out for academic tuition centers since then. Schools also had to reduce their daily homework because the government was pushing this out because they wanted to reduce the pressure on students and to basically restore education as a public good. But, ironically, that has in fact increased pressure on teachers because now the tutors are mostly gone. Some of them are also operating underground. There's even more pressure on teachers to step in to help the students achieve the same results so that they can perform well at the college entrance exams. And what that means is they've had to expand their after-class services or extra lessons, and then they have to go home to prepare for classes the next day and also to mark homework. That same year when that policy change took place, over 75% of Chinese teachers actually experience moderate to severe anxiety, while about 28% of middle school teachers have reported high risk of suffering depression. Yeah, sorry. So, Michiyo, I'm just curious to also find out, that is the academic situation that China and Hong Kong is facing. But in Japan, what kind of non-academic factors are there, have you seen, that's contributing to stress?
Well, I think really similar to what Deborah has mentioned about China. But in the case of public school teachers here that I've met also, they are employed by the Tokyo metropolitan government. So they need to handle administrative matters and report that to the metropolitan government. And they also need to keep an eye on children with special needs, plan for events, field trips. They might have to prepare handmade graduation certificates if the school is not willing to outsource the job because of a lack of a budget. What's really stressful seems to be dealing with complaints from parents, so-called monster parents. That's a common term in Japan. They receive phone calls from them, and the phone calls can go on for longer than an hour. They have to attend faculty meetings. They have trainings, which one teacher said that it doesn't really address the real problems they face. Teachers don't have time to sit down and talk to each other privately and share their problems. And during COVID-19 pandemic, one school teacher realized many teachers needed to share their problems. So he actually started a forum of school teachers, and that seems to be helping, but it's not everywhere. By the way, Deborah, we've seen China ramp up patriotic education in schools. Has that changed the way teachers operate?
I think very much so, Michiyo. That law was passed last October, and teachers, and essentially what that means is teachers in China, Hong Kong and Macau, they're now required to include patriotic education in their curriculum. So they've already been doing so in the years leading up to this. Now, for instance, Hong Kong has made flag-raising ceremonies compulsory. And aside from conducting their own lessons, teachers now also need to conduct national education lessons. They got to set aside time for that. They must also plan field trips for students to China because that is a requirement for students as well. And they must also be extra cautious of students' conduct, of their fellow teachers' conduct, especially when it comes to flag-raising ceremonies, because there is a lot of emphasis on teachers to do that well. Now, for one example that happened in Hong Kong quite recently was that 2 Hong Kong schools that provide special education for children with intellectual disabilities, they were criticized by the government for not teaching the Chinese Constitution well and also for not singing the anthem loud enough. So I raise this example just to show that there is additional emphasis placed on conduct. And because of that, teachers feel even more responsible. They feel that they are watched and scrutinized very carefully. So that also adds to the stress.
All right. And just to wrap things up, a question to you both, starting with Mitch first. I mean, I really feel for the teachers. So what sort of support systems are in place for those struggling with burnout in Japan? Michiyo first, and then Deborah.
Well, okay, for public school teachers in Tokyo, the Tokyo metropolitan government actually offers counseling. The metropolitan government on its website provides the number to call, email address to contact, and the dates when clinical psychologists will provide counseling at which locations. And separately, Tokyo started this mentorship system just this year at elementary schools. So a teacher close to the age of a new teacher will listen to his or her problems. You see, last fiscal year, the most number of newly hired public school teachers in Tokyo resigned since the Education Committee started to record the numbers from 2014. It's 169 teachers resigning in a year out of 3,472 newly hired. That's an increase 3 years in a row. And the top reason is due to so-called personal convenience. Well, that really meant was half of them were unwell.
Deborah, very quickly, what does China do for its teachers?
So in late 2019, the government issued guidelines to reduce teachers' workload by cutting down on inspections and social tasks by at least 50%. But according to personal accounts that we've seen on Weibo and Xiaohongshu, that has had little effect. A Chinese educator did an informal survey. It's an open WeChat account, and about 6,000 educators responded. And almost all of them said that the tasks still take about 90% of their non-teaching hours. So I think whatever reforms there have been in reality on the ground, teachers are still feeling the stress. They are still feeling burnt out. And so they can only go to social media to seek support from their own community.
Well, thanks so very much for touching on these topics with us, Michiyo Ishida in Tokyo and Deborah Wong in Shenzhen.